The congressional hearing room fell utterly silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood poised, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the restless tension in the air. Across the gleaming mahogany table, Elon Musk met her gaze with that familiar blend of confidence and defiance that had made him both a tech icon and a lightning rod for controversy. For months, Musk had dominated headlines, casting himself as the defender of free speech and innovation against the heavy hand of government oversight. No one had truly managed to challenge him on his own turf. Until now. Leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, the billionaire smirked, radiating the same effortless arrogance that had cowed regulators and politicians alike. He'd just dropped what he clearly thought was a mic drop statement. "Congresswoman, you simply don't understand how technology works." The room froze. Journalists held their breath. Staffers glanced up from their notes. For a few seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then Jasmine Crockett, calm, composed, unreadable, smiled faintly, reached for a folder no one had noticed before, and began to speak. What happened over the next 30 seconds didn't just leave Elon Musk visibly shaken. It exposed a reality that would send shockwaves through Silicon Valley and beyond. Before that moment, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had already earned a formidable reputation in Washington. A former public defender and civil rights attorney, she'd built her career on clarity, facts, and an almost surgical command of the law. Though rarely one for theatrics, her cross-examinations were known for being devastatingly precise. Musk, by contrast, was used to being the most powerful voice in any room. As the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and now X, the social media giant once known as Twitter, he had leveraged his fame and fortune to become an unfiltered symbol of innovation and defiance. In recent months, he'd framed himself as a victim of bureaucratic interference, railing that Congress was strangling progress in the name of control. "Freedom to innovate built America," he'd proclaimed earlier in the hearing, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Every layer of regulation costs jobs, slows discovery, and stifles the very spirit that makes this country great." Several committee members had nodded along, cautious not to alienate a man whose companies employed tens of thousands of their constituents. But Jasmine Crockett had been preparing for this moment long before the cameras started rolling. As a member of the House Oversight Committee, she had quietly gathered documents, government contracts, internal communications, and whistleblower reports that painted a far less heroic picture of Musk's empire. Her team had spent weeks connecting dots that no one else had taken the time, or dared, to connect. When her turn came to question him, the energy in the hearing room shifted. Gone was the air of deference Musk had grown accustomed to. Crockett's calmness carried authority. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice smooth and deliberate, "I've listened carefully to your testimony about government overreach. You've spoken passionately about freedom and innovation, values that we all share." Musk gave a short nod, confident she was about to deliver another routine political platitude. "However," Crockett continued, her tone sharpening slightly, "I'd like to explore the gap between your public statements and your company's actual practices." She gestured to an aide, who began distributing a series of stapled packets. "Let's begin with Exhibit A, your communications with federal agencies regarding subsidies and contracts." A flicker of unease crossed Musk's face as he glanced at the first page. The document contained internal emails, correspondence between his executives and government officials that had never been made public. "According to these records," Crockett said evenly, "your companies have received approximately $15.7 billion in federal subsidies and contracts over the past decade. That's taxpayer money, Mr. Musk. Would you agree that government support has played a significant role in your success?" Musk leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady but less sure than before. "All major industries collaborate with the government. Those are legitimate business partnerships, not handouts." "Fair enough," Crockett replied, nodding. "Then let's move to Exhibit B." The next packet contained a timeline of Musk's public statements, tweets, and interviews where he had accused federal regulators of corruption and incompetence, alongside evidence of his companies lobbying those same agencies for increased funding. "You've repeatedly criticized government oversight as anti-innovation," Crockett said, "while simultaneously requesting and receiving expanded government contracts and subsidies. Can you explain that contradiction?" The silence in the chamber deepened. Cameras clicked softly. Musk shifted in his seat, adjusting his jacket. "Working within existing systems while advocating reform isn't contradictory," he replied. "It's pragmatic." "Pragmatic," Crockett repeated, her tone almost approving. "I appreciate the word." Now, Exhibit C. She revealed a series of documents showing internal moderation policies at X, contradicting Musk's loud claims of absolute free speech. The data, sourced directly from his company's internal metrics, revealed selective enforcement patterns favoring politically aligned content. When Musk attempted to wave it off as cherry-picked data, Crockett interrupted gently. Actually, these are your company's full internal moderation reports from the last 6 months. We simply organized the data your own team collected. Now, even committee members who had been disengaged were studying the packets intently. Reporters scribbled furiously. Crockett continued, her voice even but unrelenting. Mr. Musk, earlier you suggested I don't understand technology. But understanding technology isn't about coding. It's about understanding its consequences. And that's what we're examining here today. Then came the turning point. The revelation that changed everything. Exhibit D, she said, sliding out another document. These are internal strategy memos from your company's government relations department. They outline what's referred to as regulatory capture opportunities. The words hung in the air like static. According to this plan, your executives aim to influence the very agencies you've publicly denounced, creating barriers for competitors while preserving exemptions for your own companies. The chamber went utterly still. Musk's smirk vanished. He stared at the page, color draining from his face. Would you like to read the highlighted passage aloud, or shall I? Crockett asked, offering him the document. Musk's jaw tightened. That's an early draft, one that was rejected, he said quickly. But his tone lacked conviction. Crockett inclined her head. I expected that response, which is why Exhibit E includes the implementation reports, signed by you, tracking this very strategy across multiple subsidiaries. She turned to page 15 and pointed to a spreadsheet. This quarterly report categorizes agencies as captured, in progress, or resistant. It even tracks ROI for lobbying efforts, measured by the number of exemptions obtained. A murmur rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Several lawmakers who had been deferential minutes earlier were now exchanging uneasy glances. Representative James Wilford of Michigan leaned forward, breaking the silence. Mr. Musk, I've supported deregulation and private enterprise for decades, often relying on your testimony as evidence that less oversight fuels innovation. But these documents suggest a deliberate effort to manipulate that very system. Frankly, I'm disturbed. Musk shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward his legal team seated behind him. His attorney quickly scribbled a note and passed it forward. Musk looked at it, his expression tightening before leaning toward the microphone once more. Congressman, businesses naturally seek to operate within favorable regulatory environments, Musk replied, his voice lacking its usual resonance. Every industry does this. What you're seeing is standard government relations work taken out of context. Crockett maintained her measured tone. Context is precisely what we're establishing today, Mr. Musk. Let's examine Exhibit, your personal emails with executives discussing the public narrative strategy versus your actual regulatory agenda. She displayed a series of email exchanges on the chamber screens dated just 3 months earlier. In one particularly damaging exchange, Musk had written to his head of government relations, "Keep pushing the freedom narrative publicly while we lock in the NASA contract exemptions. The public messaging is critical cover for the real work." The gallery erupted in hushed conversations. A reporter from the Washington Post was already typing frantically on her laptop, while a representative from the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank that had frequently cited Musk's arguments against regulation, stared at the screen with visible shock. Mr. Musk, you've positioned yourself as a champion of free markets and minimal government intervention. Crockett continued, her voice rising slightly to regain the room's focus. Yet these documents reveal a systematic effort to secure special treatment, government contracts, regulatory exemptions, and taxpayer subsidies that aren't available to smaller competitors. She paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle across the chamber. This isn't about whether government should regulate technology. This is about transparency and consistency. You can't simultaneously claim government is the problem while secretly leveraging it for competitive advantage. The chairman, visibly impressed by the thoroughness of Crockett's preparation, extended her questioning time by an additional 5 minutes, a rare concession that signaled the significance of what was unfolding. Musk attempted to pivot. Congresswoman, you're focusing on internal discussions without understanding the competitive landscape. My companies operate in industries dominated by established players with deep government connections. We're simply trying to level the playing field. Crockett was ready for this defense. That brings us to Exhibit G, share-sponded. nodding to her aide who distributed another document. This is a market analysis comparing government subsidies across your industries. Your companies have received substantially more per dollar of revenue than any competitor in these sectors over the past 5 years. The color drained further from Musk's face as she continued. In fact, according to your own internal analysis, not mine, government support accounts for approximately 28% of Tesla's lifetime profitability when tax credits, direct subsidies, and preferential contract terms are calculated. For SpaceX, that number rises to 42%. Senator Harrison, a longtime advocate for Musk's companies, removed his glasses slowly, visibly processing this revelation. The chairman, sensing the shifting mood, intervened. Mr. Musk, would you care to respond to these specific figures? Musk conferred briefly with his team before responding. Those calculations include standard industry incentives available to all companies. They're not special arrangements. Actually, Crockett interjected, maintaining her professional demeanor. Exhibit H contains your team's competitor analysis, showing that, through targeted lobbying, your companies secured modified terms that weren't extended to others in your industries. Your government relations department specifically tracked these as exclusive wins in their performance metrics. She displayed a slide showing comparative incentive structures across automotive and aerospace companies, with Tesla and SpaceX consistently receiving enhanced terms through what internal documents labeled relationship leverage and strategic regulatory positioning. The methodical dismantling continued for several more minutes as Crockett walked through additional evidence, each piece more damaging than the last. What had begun as standard congressional testimony had transformed into a comprehensive exposé of corporate doublespeak. Mr. Musk, innovation is indeed vital to America's future. No one disputes that, Crockett continued, her tone now carrying the confidence of someone who had thoroughly proven her case. But so is truth. So is consistency between public claims and private actions. So is recognizing that the same government you criticize has been a partner in your success. She closed her portfolio and looked directly at Musk. You're right that America needs visionaries, but we also need honesty about the ecosystems that make innovation possible. Government isn't your enemy. It's been your investor, your customer, and your enabler. The American people deserve that acknowledgement. Throughout her presentation, Crockett had maintained a tone of professional respect, never resorting to personal attacks or theatrical confrontation. This approach only amplified the impact of her evidence-based dismantling of Musk's carefully cultivated public image. The chairman, recognizing the historic nature of what had just transpired, extended the session to allow additional questions from committee members who now seemed eager to distance themselves from positions they had previously endorsed. Congressman Wilford, still studying the documents intently, addressed Musk again. Sir, I've supported your companies and cited your perspectives in my own policy positions. These documents suggest I may have been operating on incomplete information. Can you explain why your private strategies differ so dramatically from your public positions? Musk, who had arrived planning to dominate the hearing with his usual confidence, now sat quietly reviewing notes with his legal team. His response, when it finally came, lacked the certainty that had defined his public persona. Congressman business requires navigating complex environments. Our public advocacy reflects our ideal vision, while our operational strategies address current realities. The explanation fell flat in the wake of Crockett's meticulous evidence. 3 other committee members posed similarly pointed questions, each referencing specific documents from Crockett's presentation. As the extended session continued, it was clear the dynamic had permanently shifted. Journalists who had come expecting to report on Musk's persuasive testimony were now frantically rewriting their stories. Within minutes, social media exploded with clips of the exchange. Number Crockett receipts trending nationwide alongside number Musk exposed and number regulatory capture. In one particularly viral moment, Crockett addressed Musk's earlier dismissive comment directly. You suggested, I don't understand technology. Mr. Musk. I hope these documents demonstrate that what I understand perfectly well is accountability regardless of whether it involves a local government or a trillion-dollar technology empire. The measured delivery combined with the overwhelming evidence created something rarely seen in congressional hearings, a genuine moment of accountability that transcended partisan divisions. Conservative and progressive members alike found themselves united in their stunned appreciation of Crockett's meticulous approach. As the chairman finally moved to conclude Crockett's questioning after nearly 40 minutes, far beyond the standard allocation, Musk attempted one final defense. Congresswoman, I respect your preparation, but these documents represent a fraction of our operations taken out of context. My companies have created thousands of American jobs and advanced critical technologies. Crockett nodded acknowledgement. Your contributions are significant, Mr. Musk, which is precisely why this matters. Noon is questioning your company's innovations or their importance to our economy. What I'm questioning is the gap between your public claims about government's role and your private actions to leverage that same government for competitive advantage. She gathered her documents as the chairman prepared to recognize the next questioner. America benefits from innovation and entrepreneurship, but we also benefit from honesty about the public-private partnerships that make that innovation possible. Thank you for your time. As Crockett yielded the floor, the packed chamber remained unusually quiet, still processing what they had witnessed. A carefully constructed public narrative dismantled, not through rhetoric or grandstanding, but through methodical evidence and professional questioning. The remainder of the hearing proceeded, but everyone present understood that something fundamental had shifted. Thestery was no longer Musk's testimony about government overreach. It was Crockett's evidence-based exposure of the complex reality behind the simplistic narrative. By session's end, the video clips had already reached millions. Major news outlets had adjusted their headlines from the expected Musk challenges. Congress on-tech regulation to variations of Congresswoman exposes Musk's regulatory double standard with company documents. As they left the chamber, committee members from both parties approached Crockett to examine specific documents more closely. Even those who had previously aligned with Musk's positions found themselves unable to dismiss the evidence she had presented. The conversation about technology regulation had fundamentally changed in the span of a single hearing. The aftermath of Congresswoman Crockett's methodical dismantling of Musk's testimony extended far beyond that hearing room, creating ripples that would transform the relationship between Silicon Valley and Washington for years to come. Within hours, major technology and business publications had shifted their coverage dramatically. The Wall Street Journal ran with Crockett exposes Silicon Valley's regulatory paradox, while TechCrunch published, Musk meets his match. Congressional oversight gets serious. The Washington Post's headline read simply, "The documents Elon didn't want you to see." Financial markets responded swiftly as investors processed the implications. Tesla stock dropped 7.2% 2% by closing bell. While other Musk-affiliated companies saw similar declines, market analysts noted this wasn't just a typical fluctuation. Butte reflected genuine concern about potential regulatory consequences and damaged public trust. What we witnessed today was unprecedented, explained Miranda Chen, senior technology analyst at Goldman Sachs, during a CNBC interview the following morning. The specificity of the evidence presented raises questions about disclosure practices and regulatory compliance across Musk's companies. Markets hate uncertainty, and today introduced significant uncertainty. For Crockett, the impact was transformative and lasting. Once known primarily within political circles, she emerged overnight as a leading voice on technology policy and corporate accountability. Her approach, factual, methodical, and substantive rather than performative, drew praise from policy experts across the political spectrum. The morning after the hearing, Crockett appeared on several news programs, maintaining the same measured tone that had characterized her questioning. When pressed about her preparation, she explained this wasn't about creating a gotcha moment. It was about bringing transparency to discussions that affect millions of Americans. Technology policy is too important for posturing from either side. On NBC's Meet the Press, the host pressed her on whether she intended to damage Musk's companies. Her response captured the nuance that had made her hearing performance so effective. Innovation requires both freedom and accountability. Mr. Musk's companies have created remarkable technologies and thousands of jobs. That success doesn't exempt them from honest accounting about the public resources and regulatory frameworks that enabled that success. Conservative commentator William Kristol, typically skeptical of congressional oversight, wrote in The Bulwark, "Whatever your views on regulation, Crockett's approach represents what government accountability should look like. Thoroughly researched, professionally presented, and focused on facts rather than personalities." She's reminded us that effective oversight doesn't have to be partisan or theatrical. Even tech industry leaders began adjusting their rhetoric. 3 days after the hearing, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella acknowledged in a Stanford University appearance, "The technology sector has sometimes oversimplified the complex relationship between innovation and regulation. The reality is that thoughtful regulatory frameworks can enable innovation while protecting public interests. We need honest dialogue about this balance." The most unexpected development came 2 weeks later, when Musk himself took an unprecedented step. After initially dismissing the hearing as political theater in a late-night social media post, he published a more substantial statement, acknowledging the valid points raised during his testimony. While I maintain that innovation requires freedom from excessive regulation, Congresswoman Crockett correctly identified areas where we need greater transparency about public-private partnerships. He wrote in a formal statement released through his company's websites, "My commitment to advancing humanity's future through technology remains unchanged, but I acknowledge that government has played a significant role in enabling these advances." Industry observers noted this marked a significant shift from his usually combative stance toward criticism. CNBC's technology correspondent remarked, "In 15 years covering Musk, I've never seen him acknowledge a critique this substantively." The Crockett effect is real within Silicon Valley's inner circles. The hearing became a watershed moment that prompted serious reassessment of government relations strategies. At a closed-door conference of technology executives the following month, multiple participants referenced the Crockett Standard as a new benchmark for anticipating governmental scrutiny. A senior executive from a major technology company speaking anonymously to the information revealed, "Every government relations team in the Valley is reviewing their public messaging versus their actual lobbying strategies. No one wants to be the next example." The documents she presented could have come from almost any major tech company. The disconnect between public positions and private actions has been standard practice. Academic institutions took note as well. Harvard Business School quickly developed a case study on the hearing titled, "When Public Narrative Meets Private Strategy: Lessons from the Crockett-Musk Exchange." The case became required reading in corporate ethics courses at leading universities examining the sustainability of maintaining divergent public and private positions in an era of increased transparency. Dr. Catherine Chen, professor of technology ethics at Stanford, organized a symposium specifically addressing the issues raised during the hearing. What Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated wasn't just political theater. She explained in her opening address. She showed that effective oversight requires deep understanding of both technical and business realities. It's a model for how government can engage meaningfully with technology leaders. The symposium, which featured speakers from both regulatory agencies and technology companies, marked a shift in the typically adversarial relationship between Silicon Valley and Washington. Participants focused on developing frameworks for more honest accounting of how public resources and private innovation intersect. More broadly, the exchange became a watershed moment in the relationship between government and technology companies. Other tech executives, noting Musk's experience, began approaching congressional inquiries with greater transparency and nuance. Silicon Valley's libertarian orthodoxy, which had long positioned government as an obstacle rather than a partner, faced its most serious challenge in years. Venture capitalist Marc Andre, previously an outspoken critic of government involvement in technology, acknowledged in a blog post, "The Valley's creation myth has sometimes overlooked the role of public investment in creating the foundations for our innovation ecosystem. DARPA, NASA, NSF grants, public universities, government has been a technology enabler from the beginning. We can advocate for smart regulation without denying this reality." For ordinary Americans, the confrontation resonated because it cut through the mythology surrounding tech billionaires. A CBS News poll found that 68% of respondents felt Crockett had exposed important truths about how technology companies operate behind their public images. More significantly, 72% said the hearing had changed their understanding of the government's role in fostering technological innovation. The policy implications extended beyond symbolic shifts in rhetoric. 6 months after the hearing, bipartisan support emerged for the Technology Transparency Act, legislation requiring companies receiving significant government funding to disclose these arrangements more comprehensively in their public communications and investor materials. Senator James Langford, a conservative Republican who co-sponsored the bill, explained his support. "This isn't about more regulation. It's about honest accounting. When taxpayer dollars support private enterprise, citizens deserve transparency about that relationship." The legislation passed with unusual bipartisan support, reflecting a new consensus that transcended traditional divisions about government's role in the economy. Political commentators noted that Crockett's approach, focusing on factual evidence rather than ideological arguments, had created space for this rare moment of legislative cooperation. "This wasn't about attacking innovation or success," Crockett explained in a PBS interview months later. "It was about honest accounting. Government and private enterprise both have crucial roles in America's progress. Pretending otherwise serves neither." Her office released a comprehensive policy paper titled, "Beyond the False Dictomy: Rethinking Public-Private Partnership in Technology Development," which became a reference point in policy discussions across Washington. The document outlined a framework for understanding how government investment and private entrepreneurship had collaborated throughout American technological history, from railroads to semiconductors to the internet itself. As technology policy debates continued in the following months, The Crockett Standard became shorthand for fact-based, thorough oversight that looked beyond rhetoric to examine evidence. Her methodical dismantling of Musk's testimony provided a template for holding powerful interests accountable without resorting to grandstanding. Even the visual language of congressional hearings began to shift. Staff members increasingly prepared detailed evidence packets, rather than relying on rhetorical questions. Committee chairs established new expectations for substantive questioning based on documented research rather than sound bites designed for social media. For Crockett herself, the moment reinforced what had guided her since her days as a public defender: that power must be met with preparation, that facts matter more than fame, and that public service means standing firm when confronted with the most intimidating opponents. "I didn't set out to create a viral moment," she reflected in a Georgetown University address, marking the one-year anniversary of the hearing. "I set out to establish facts that could inform better policy." The reason that resonated isn't because people wanted to see a powerful person humbled. It's because people are hungry for substance over spectacle in our public discourse. Her approach didn't just change one. Hearing it established a new model for how elected officials could effectively represent the public interest in an era dominated by corporate influence. Enrollment in law schools and public policy programs saw notable increases in the year following the hearing, with admissions essays frequently citing Crockett's example as inspiration for pursuing careers in public service. The ripple effects extended into corporate boardrooms as well. The Crockett risk assessment became standard practice among corporate communications teams evaluating the alignment between public messaging and internal operations. Technology companies began reviewing their government relations strategies with new scrutiny, recognizing that the era of maintaining entirely separate public and private positions had likely ended in Washington and Silicon Valley alike. The lesson was clear. Authentic accountability requires substance, not spectacle. Crockett had provided exactly that, changing not just one news cycle, but the fundamental terms of engagement between America's most powerful technology leaders and the democratic institutions designed to ensure they serve the public good. What began as a standard congressional hearing had become something much more significant. A reminder that in a healthy democracy, even the most powerful figures must ultimately answer to the people and their elected representatives, especially when those representatives come thoroughly prepared. A year after the hearing, as Crockett accepted the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award for her work, the citation read, "In an era often defined by theatrical politics and superficial exchanges, Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated that meticulous preparation and unwavering commitment to truth can cut through the most carefully crafted narratives. Her courage lay not in grand gestures but in the patient, methodical pursuit of accountability that forms the foundation of democratic governance." Standing at the podium, Crockett reflected on the unexpected impact of that single congressional exchange. "The documents I presented that day weren't extraordinary. What was extraordinary was simply bringing private truths into public view. Democracy functions best when citizens have access to unvarnished facts rather than carefully curated narratives." She concluded her acceptance speech with words that captured the essential lesson of her confrontation with Musk. Technology will continue to transform our world at an accelerating pace. The question isn't whether we embrace innovation. Of course we must. The question is whether we can maintain our commitment to truth, transparency, and the public good as we navigate this transformation. That commitment isn't partisan. It isn't anti-innovation. It's simply the price of admission for participating in the American experiment. As she left the stage to sustained applause, few could dispute that what had begun as a routine oversight hearing had evolved into something approaching a case study in democratic accountability, a template for how substance could triumph over spectacle in an age often defined by the opposite.